Hello everyone, my name is Lois and welcome to my channel where I give you the lowdown on all things books, everything I've been reading, everything I want to read. So this video is the first video of my channel and also the first video of the new year. So I thought what better way to start off than talk about the top books that I read in 2022. And I have a big variety of all different types of genres, some popular books that you may have already heard of, and hopefully maybe some new ones that you haven't heard of that you can give a read if they sound interesting to you. Okay, so the first books that I want to talk about are actually a series, and they are the Earthsea books written by Ursula Le Guin. The first 4 books of the series, called the Earthsea Quartet, are in this massive version, and in it there is A Wizard of Earthsea, The Tombs of Atuan, The Farthest Shore, and Tahanu. There's also Earthsea, Tales from Earthsea, and then the last book of the series is The Other Wind. I couldn't choose which one was my favorite. I just wanted to recommend the entire series because I just loved them so much. Okay, so what are these books about? So it's about a young wizard named Jed and how he essentially comes into his power and learns the true way of magic and just what happens in the course of his life, who he meets, what he goes through. They're written very beautifully. It's very quiet, but also really cozy. And it's kind of different in the sense that the magic system in these books are based more on balance and equilibrium. They're very focused and grounded in nature and language. So it's pretty different from, the traditional ideas of power. And you feel really submerged in the world. It's very atmospheric. Essentially, these books are really about compassion, friendship, kindness, love, and how those things ultimately overcome, obstacles and things that you experience in life. So overall, I just loved the characters. I loved the plot line, the writing style. I thought it was so cozy and beautifully written and felt so much deeper than just, like a typical fun fantasy book. And so if that sounds like something that's interesting to you, something that you would want to give a try, then I would definitely recommend these books. Okay, so for the next book, it is another fantasy, but again, very different, and that is Piranesi. Now, I don't know if this book is for everyone, however, I really liked it. I feel like it's a bit of a difficult book to describe. As you're reading it, there is like a mystery element where you're not entirely sure of what's going on. As you're reading it, you're kind of like putting the pieces together and figuring out what's really going on, right? And it feels very otherworldly, feels very magical, and also very beautiful. It's very quiet and lyrical. Just to give you a little bit of more insight of what the book is about, Piranesi's house is no ordinary building. Its rooms are infinite, its corridors endless, its walls lined with thousands upon thousands of statues. Within the labyrinth of halls, an ocean is imprisoned. Waves thunder up staircases, rooms are flooded in an instant. But Piranesi is not afraid. He understands the tides as he understands the pattern of the labyrinth itself. He lives to explore the house. There is one other person in the house, a man called the Other, who visits Piranesi twice a week and asks for help with research into a great and secret knowledge. But as Piranesi explores, evidence emerges of another person, and a terrible truth begins to unravel, revealing a world beyond the one Piranesi has always known. So if that sounds interesting to you, I would highly recommend the surprise element. You just want to know what, I guess, is really going on. And honestly, the only way to know that is to give it a read. So highly recommend this book. Okay, next is a literary fiction book called The Idiot by Elif Batuman. It's like a literary fiction, but also a coming of age novel and story. And it's essentially about a girl named Selin, who is a Turkish American and the daughter of Turkish immigrants. And she is a student at Harvard in the 1990s. And this book essentially just follows her freshman year, just the reflections that she has, the things that she is going through. And I think the thing I love about it is that you can just tell as you're reading that she's very naive, but it's very heartwarming. And so you're really just seeing the world through her eyes and her experiences. Her naivety is what makes the book somewhat comical. You just see her reflecting on her life and talking about what happens to her while also having, very literary and philosophical conversations with herself and asking her these deep questions. I thought it was very clever, very unique, and also very witty. and you just see different layers to her. You also see just her obsession with an upperclassman that she meets, and then also I decided to mention the sequel, which I didn't know there was gonna be one, but this one is called Either Or. I believe this one came out in 2022. And it's very similar in terms of the style, except you could see her maturing a little bit, slowly growing up, becoming more exposed to new experiences and just the world. But you do really see her spiraling in her obsession with the same upperclassman named Ivan. And overall, I think I just really like that kind of like day in and day out, just following her life, her reflections, whether they're silly or more intense and deep. Yeah, I really feel like it is like a very unique coming of age story, and I believe that there's gonna be more to come that probably follow her into her junior and senior years as well. I would say if you're someone that really likes a clear plot line, then maybe you wouldn't like this book. Okay, and then next is the book If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. And this, I believe, is characterized as a mystery thriller, but also can fall into the dark academia category. So I think what drew me to this book is the fact that I really liked The Secret History by Donna Tartt, which I read maybe a couple years ago now. And ever since I read that, I wanted to find more books similar to that and also within that same dark academia category, but honestly, I couldn't really find any that interested me. It really gives like the same vibes as The Secret History. So this book is about a tight-knit group of 7 friends who play Shakespearean actors at Delacour Classical Conservatory, a place of keen ambition and fierce competition. And in this secluded world of firelight and leather-bound books, Oliver and his friends play the same roles on stage and off: hero, villain, tyrant, temptress, ingenue, and extra. But in their 4th and final year, good-natured rivalries turn ugly, and on opening night, real violence invades the students' world of make-believe. In the morning, the 4th years find themselves facing their very own tragedy and their greatest acting challenge yet: convincing the police, each other, and themselves that they are innocent. There is a murder that takes place in this book, but obviously you don't know what really happens until you read and you get to the end. But it's interesting because the way it starts is it follows the main character, Oliver Marks, and he has just been released from jail. He is met by Detective Colburn, who essentially is the one that was on the case of the murder and put Oliver into jail in the first place, right? But Detective Colburn still doesn't really know the truth. You know, it's been 10 years since the murder and everything that's happened. Now that Oliver's out of jail, the detective goes and basically asks him to tell him what really happened. And that's how the story unfolds. If you're someone that really likes, you know, literary thriller, dark academia, you liked The Secret History, then I think you would enjoy this. However, it talks a lot about Shakespeare because, again, these 7 friends are very much into Shakespeare, and that like really is what their school experience is all about, just constantly performing different Shakespeare plays. You know, a lot of times you don't really know, like, are they really themselves? Are they playing a character? Do they get so into being their character that they kind of lose themselves? I enjoyed it, and again, after I read it, I wanted to find more dark academia books to read. Okay, the next books I want to talk about are also within a series. It's the Southern Reach Trilogy by Jeff Vandermeer. The first one is Annihilation, second one is Authority, and third one is Acceptance. So I actually started reading Annihilation many years ago, and I finished that, but I never actually finished the entire series. Now, I will say that of the 3, Annihilation is probably my favorite, but you know, it's not necessarily a standalone book, so I would recommend just reading the entire series. This falls under the category of sci-fi, but also something known as new weird fiction. I would also say that there is horror in it as well. Definitely what I loved about this book is that it is so creepy and scary. Not in the conventional horror ways where there's paranormal activity or anything like that, but Jeff Vandermeer is just so good at creating an atmosphere where you feel extremely afraid, like you're constantly looking over your shoulder because you think there's something just like creeping behind you. But I loved it because I felt like I was immersed completely into the world. The whole time I'd be reading, like my heart was racing. I was just feeling extremely uneasy. And I was shocked that a book could make me feel that way because I've never had that experience before. This book is a first-person narrative, and it's told from the perspective of the biologist. So essentially, the biologist is one of a team of 4 women who enter into this unknown, pristine wilderness called Area X, which is, you know, somewhat of a biological anomaly with strange borders. You don't really know what's going on in there because as soon as you enter, all your technology stops working, so you can't really communicate with the outside normal world. It's an uninhabited, pristine wilderness, and missions are constantly sent into Area X to figure out what it is and why it exists. However, a lot of the teams in the past have gone missing, or they'd come back but somewhat altered, and you don't really know why or what's going on in there. And it really explores the ideas of human versus non-human life, also our ability to be objective, because as we know, we're just, you know, following the perspective of one person. And I will say that I did watch the movie that's kind of based off this book, but in my opinion, I thought that the movie and the book were very different. I definitely preferred reading the book better. However, you know, if you are interested in sci-fi, then I would say also give the movie a watch and you can form your own opinion on that. Also, by the way, if you see me looking down, it's because I'm just referring to my journal. Okay, so the next book that I have to share with you is Lent by Jo Walton. Now, this is a historical fantasy thriller set in Renaissance Florence and in hell. Now, this book was very interesting and very different to what I've read, and I was completely like just eating it up. I think the fantasy elements are definitely more subtle because, you know, there aren't like the typical dragons and magic and all of that. What I didn't realize is that it was actually based on a real life character, a 15th century monk named Girolamo Savonarola. He was known to be a spiritual leader and had the gift of prophesying, and he can see demons. And he doesn't really know why, right? He thinks that it's a gift from God that he can use to really serve, you know, God and to bring people to him. However, there are a few surprises in this book and everything is not the way it seems. So I don't want to spoil it for you, but I will say that this had me gripped and I was so into it. You know, I don't read a lot of historical fantasies or just, I guess, historical fiction in general, but I thought this was so good. I would really recommend it. But yeah, it says that it entails a vision of the Renaissance that is shot through with real demons, real damnation, and real miracles. So that's all I'm gonna say about this. I highly recommend. I thought it was so fun and it really left an impression on me. I just kept thinking about it after I finished reading it. So yeah, if any of that sounds interesting to you, I know it's kind of vague because I don't want to spoil anything, then I definitely suggest that you give this a read. Okay, next we have Ordinary Monsters by J.M. Muro. This is historical fantasy, okay, which is crazy because I just said I don't read a lot of historical fantasy, and I realized that I do like that genre a lot. Now, this is the first book in a series, but I believe this is the only one that's come out yet, but I am very excited to read what comes next. It follows a number of talents who are orphan children with special abilities, and they're all kind of hunted and found and mysteriously gathered at an institution where they're essentially taught to use their powers, and also it provides them just like a place of safety and protection. Essentially, there's a lot of different narratives and storylines that are taking place, following different characters, and essentially the author is kind of pulling all of those narratives together, and I thought that the author did a really good job of doing that. It is a pretty thick book, so I will say that there are times where it can feel a little bit chaotic, especially towards the middle, where there's a lot of different things going on. But I will say that at the end, everything is kind of pulled back together. I just felt like it was very different because, you know, it is about people who have special powers and abilities, but not in the more like common superhero sense, if that makes sense. Yeah, I would say there's a lot of action in it, so it definitely doesn't feel very slow. I feel like you can very easily get into it. If that sounds like something that you're interested in, historical fantasy, then I recommend. Okay, the next book is All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. And this is a historical fiction. It's very popular. I'm sure many of you guys have already read it. If anything, I'm probably late to reading this. It essentially has 2 parallel storylines about 2 children living during the time of World War II. The first storyline follows Marie-Laure, who is a blind girl living in France with her dad. And the second storyline follows Werner, who is a boy in Germany living in an orphanage. I think it's really beautiful because it's kind of told in the perspective of just children and what their everyday experiences are like, how the war is impacting them and their families and shaping the trajectory of their lives, especially when the two storylines finally do intersect. I just found it very beautiful, very moving. It says on the back that this book is a tender exploration of this world's paradoxes, the beauty of the laws of nature and the terrible ends to which war subverts them, the frailty and the resilience of the human heart, the immutability of a moment and the healing power of time. The language is as expertly crafted as the master locksmith's models in the story, and the settings as intricately evoked, a compelling and uplifting novel. I would highly recommend that you give this a read. Okay, so now I'm nearing the end. The next book is definitely probably a well-beloved classic, and that is Jane Eyre. So again, this is another book that I probably should have read a while ago, but honestly just never got around to it. And I think there was a part of me that felt like it would be dull or maybe even boring. Maybe the writing would be a little too complicated or not my style, because it was written, you know, many years ago. I absolutely love this book, and I love the character Jane Eyre as well. She definitely is someone that is extremely unforgettable. What I liked the most is just her independence and her ability to stay true to herself and to not let others define her. So Jane Eyre is essentially just a poor and plain, you know, orphan girl, but she has an indomitable spirit and she's an independent woman who makes a life for herself. She's not someone that just sees marriage as her only prospect like probably many other women during that time did. It's just really refreshing to see a character like this because she has such a strong mind. She's very serious, very genuine, and also very smart. There is romance in this, obviously, between Jane and Rochester, but the romance is not one that's just all about passion and lust, but really more romance of the mind and the heart. It's the idea of her just really sticking to her morals and her principles, even if it comes at a cost or it makes her own life more difficult. And I think that's very admirable. I loved this book, and I also really loved the gothic style of it as well. But yeah, definitely one of my favorite classics. Okay, last but not least is a book of short stories called Stories of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang. I would categorize the stories in this book as, you know, sci-fi fantasy. They're heavily influenced by science, mathematics, linguistics, but I think what I really loved about this and admired about the author is that he is able to integrate very difficult concepts into the story in a very readable and understandable way, which I think is very impressive. There definitely were some moments where I had to really concentrate to understand exactly what he was talking about because, again, some of these concepts are very complex. But overall, I felt like they were embedded very naturally into the stories. Yeah, some of it was definitely mind-blowing. I thought it was very creative, very imaginative, very intellectual. If you're someone that's very interested in science, but I guess sci-fi with actual like scientific foundations, and I think you would really like this. Part of the reason I read this was because I wanted to read Story of Your Life, which was the basis for the movie Arrival. And that was probably one of my favorite stories because, again, it was so moving. This book definitely left an impression on me, left me speechless a lot of the times. You're someone that is interested in sci-fi or science and also want to read more short stories, and I would definitely give this a try. I'm normally not someone that reads a lot of short stories, but I do want to get into it more. I definitely didn't love all of them, but I will say there were some good ones in here, so would highly recommend. 2022 was a good reading year for me. I was able to read about 64 books, which surpassed my goal of 50. So I think this year I definitely want to read a lot more and also branch out. I noticed that there's a lot of like fantasy, historical fiction, maybe some sci-fi. So yeah, I want to keep reading more of those, but also just branch out, see what else I might like, and just try some new things. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope there were some books in there that sounded interesting to you that you might want to give a read. And if you do, let me know how you liked it. And I will see you again in my next video. Bye.